Acolytes. Conky Cootdowns. With when public art goes wrong. Now you may or may not know, I love art. No matter what the art is, most of them, if I see them as something worthy of my time, I will watch it and enjoy it. But let's see what he has to say about it, because this is very interesting, at least to me.
Is a tricky thing to get right.
Yep, public art is extremely tricky to get right, because you have to find the balance between people who actually want to watch it, or it has to be beautiful art. It cannot, it has to be something that's well seen upon. And the thing is, it could be a banana on a wall that somebody eats afterwards. Or it could be actually a beautiful work of art, a statue from me that everybody would love. But hey, let's see.
Unlike art in a museum, which people deliberately pay to see, public art is often not deliberately paid for by the public, and is usually constructed in high traffic areas where you're gonna see it every day on your way to work.
Yep, and expensive.
So if you're an artist being commissioned to make a public piece of art, you'd better get it right, or else the entire city's gonna hate you.
Yep.
And random people on the internet with no artistic abilities at all are gonna make fun of your life's work.
And yes, those things cost a lot of money. If you see it every day to your way to work and think it's ugly, it's gonna frustrate you.
So without further ado, here are 10 public art installations that went horribly wrong.
Ah, fair enough.
Number 10, Traveling Light. Our journey begins in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, or just off an overpass you
I hope he's gonna show the butt plug.
can find
Yes.
this big blue thing right here. Designed by the Ingezide Art Collective, Traveling Light is a big blue steel ring with a traffic light stuck on top of it. It measures about 55 feet tall and across and boasts a whopping 2.3 stars on Google reviews. Yeah, when this thing was first installed, the people of Calgary were not super happy. Not only because the art here is abstract and odd, but mostly because the art here cost $471,000 in taxpayer money and public funding. Calgary's got a tricky history with public art, mostly because of how much money is sunk into it. In fact, they even have legislation that requires any public construction project under $50 million to set aside 1% of its budget to public art, leading to a bit of a surplus of controversial sculptures popping up around the city. Traveling Light in particular was so controversial, even the mayor called it awful, as the art was approved right before he could enter office. Eventually, the people had had enough of this madness, and the government officials spoke up about the absurdness of the big blue ring, and in 2023, the city council hosted an emergency meeting where they approved the construction of a second Traveling Light ring. It's to be placed somewhere else in the city, but to my knowledge, it has yet to actually be funded, so I mean, well, we'll just have to wait and see, and in the meantime, just thank goodness that most of us don't live in Calgary.
Acolytes, if you live in America, you paid for this. Now you know why you get pissed off if the public art is actually ugly.
Number 9, Morning Sun. We're traveling down south to the wealthy city of Carmel, Indiana, where in the middle of a roundabout you can find whatever this is supposed to be. Created by sculptor Brad Howe, Morning Sun is a abstract piece made from steel and urethane resin. It measures 16 feet tall and features a red and white body topped with a interpretive, spiky ball looking thing. When it was erected in the beginning of 2021, it was compared
Acolytes, you know exactly what I think this looks like. This looks like a freaking sack. And then there comes like erected in the compared
mostly to a COVID-19 virus, while others saw it as a big fat, round, hairy, kiwi fruit, of course.
Yeah, of course.
Which makes no sense because kiwis aren't even grown in
Indiana.
I am
sorry.
Actually, a kiwi is just what I see. Most people just call the statue Harry Ball. Costing a modest $209,000, Morning Sun is just one of 17 sculptures that have been built in Carmel roundabouts, together costing over $5 million in taxpayer dollars. But despite the high price tags, none of these sculptures really faced any backlash. Besides this one, not only was it expensive and not super appealing to most, but it was constructed right outside of a brand new luxury apartment complex. In fact, a close friend of mine actually lived in one of these street view units at the time it was constructed, and it had a perfect view of the sculpture. Here you're seeing some of my own boots on the ground coverage. Facing scrutiny, it was debated whether the sculpture should stay or not. And in late 2022, at the cost of an additional $50,000, the sculpture was eventually moved to a different roundabout 2 miles north, where it sits closer to 2 roundabouts that also feature some of Brad Howe's sculptures. Number 8. Talus Dome. We're moving back to Alberta, Canada, this time to the city of Edmonton. And what better place to put a $600,000 public art piece than the side of a busy highway? Built by Bal Noga's studio in 2011, Talus Dome is a welded pile of nearly 1,000 stainless steel spheres. This sculpture has been mocked constantly throughout its 14-year existence. It's of course scrutinized for its expensive construction cost, but also for the fact that no one seems to know what it's supposed to be. Some people think it's a stack of marbles, while others see a giant pile of rabbit droppings that have been spray painted as if everything in Edmonton needs to be chrome. In reality, Talus Dome derives its name from talus slopes, which are a geological formation. They are these piles of eroded rock that used to exist in the same spot as the sculpture before the highway was constructed here.
They should have just kept that one and built the highway. Oh my...
It's surprising that this sculpture itself hasn't been eroded away by vandals, because it has been vandalized on 3 separate occasions so far with varying degrees of damage. But probably the best story surrounding the Talus Dome occurred in 2023 when a full-grown 26-year-old man tried to climb the Talus Dome, slipped in between the spheres, and became trapped inside.
Some dude is stuck inside the Talus balls. Look at this.
It's gotta be a fate worse than death, being stuck in the balls like that one scene from The Incredibles. But luckily the fire department was called and the man was saved, and promptly fined $5,000 in criminal negligence charges in addition to the cost to repair the sculpture from the damage caused by the rescue.
Oh! I mean, the shame of falling down, that's one thing. Paying the criminal charges, the second thing. But paying for this shit to get it repaired, that has to sting. That has to really sting.
And I have a feeling that that wasn't cheap either. Number 7. Tilted Arc. We're ping-ponging back to the States, this time to New York City, in the year of 1981, when this massive sculpture was constructed right in the middle of the busy Foley Federal Plaza. Created by artist Richard Serra, Tilted Arc at first looks like a giant sheet of rust-covered steel. And that's exactly what it is. This somewhat inconveniently placed sculpture measured 12 feet tall and 2.5 inches thick.
You know what? This guy just came in and said, no, F everybody that actually has fun on the freaking fountain. I don't want to see it. And he got paid for it with taxpayer money.
And 120 feet long, which made it long enough to cause a lot of outrage among pedestrians. With a construction cost of $175,000, about $600,000 in today's money, the Tilted Arc was seen as an expensive eyesore and a massive inconvenience to the large plaza. Locals claim the sculpture made the plaza feel much more cold and closed off than it used to. It supposedly made the location feel less social and heavily impeded foot traffic, as people had to make their long way around it to navigate across the plaza. Many discussions were had and trials were held, with folks lobbying to have the sculpture removed. However, Richard Serra, along with many art lovers, all shamed those who wanted to take it down. They particularly shamed the government, as it was the government who commissioned Serra to build the Ark in the first place, and the Ark was promised to be a permanent display. And because it was so large and heavy, to remove it would mean destroying it. It was
good. It's shit. It just brings separation to the people out there. It removes a small thing where people just could look at the fountain, see people having fun, and thinking, yeah, that's nice. Or being an asshole and being like, yeah, fuck those fuckers. But hey, it's still interaction. And this just removes it and adds basically die Mauer, Berliner Mauer, from Germany. Fuck that.
It was eventually ruled that because the art was funded by the government, it was thus owned by the government, and it was the government's decision to destroy it 8 years after its construction. Yes, to the joy of many, but to the dismay of many others, including Richard Serra. And although Serra just recently passed away in 2024, many of his works and sculptures still exist. Many very similar to, but much less controversial than, his tilted arc. Number 6. The Embrace. We're staying on the East Coast but moving to Boston, Massachusetts, where in 2023, this massive bronze sculpture was erected in the Boston Commons. The sculpture depicts the hugging arms of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his wife, Coretta Scott King. It is based off of this famous photo of Dr. King shortly after receiving the Nobel Peace Prize. The statue measures 25 feet wide and 20 feet tall, and is meant to be a monument to Dr. King's legacy as a leader in the civil rights movement. So, what seems to be the problem here? The sculpture doesn't seem controversial, and although it cost about $10 million to build, it was largely funded through a non-profit organization, not through the government. Well, the thing is, when you actually view the sculpture from the ground in the round, it's not really easy to tell what it is. In fact, because the sculpture features no faces or obvious hints as to what it's supposed to represent, many people who saw the sculpture for the first time saw a variety of different things from different angles.
It's not the missing heads that's the atrocity, although people glam onto that. It's a stump that looks like a penis.
Yes, from many angles, the sculpture looks rather phallic, especially from this one. The controversy behind the sculpture spread around the world, with many harsh comments directed towards the city for proving such an interpretive, abstract-ish piece of art. And the artist himself, Hank Willis Thomas, gained quite a bit of scrutiny, but luckily he didn't seem too bothered and put down by the harsh comments.
When you put art in the world, you can't control what people see. You know, I think about the Rorschach test, the ink blot test, you know?
Nowadays, the sculpture isn't too much of a problem, as most people know what it's supposed to be by this point, and most people can appreciate what it represents. But it is still common for some first-time passerbys to get a little confused at what they're looking at. Number 5, the Caja Madrid Obelisk. And we're finally escaping North America to Madrid, Spain, where in this big honkin' roundabout, you can find a big honkin' bronze spike. Built in 2009 and designed by architect Santiago Calatrava, this structure was supposed to be a grand landmark of Madrid, dedicated to the city's 300th anniversary. The tall spike is clad in 462 bronze strips that move and flow, giving the sculpture a very organic look. The controversy behind this piece actually doesn't come from its appearance, but rather its conception. In the original plans, the spike was supposed to reach a height of 120 meters, but the land it sits on is undermined by 3 major metro lines. This meant the ground was much too hollow to support the massive weight of a 120 meter bronze spike, so they had to shrink the project down to only 92 meters. The project also was not very cheap, costing an estimated 14 million euros to build, which was much more than what was anticipated even before the project was shrunk. Luckily to the taxpayers of Madrid, the obelisk was a donation to the city by a large bank firm. Unluckily for the taxpayers, once the construction cost was initially increased, the bank requested the city to donate a large lump sum of cash to help support the construction of the city's own gift. Luckily for the taxpayers of the city was able to refuse this request, and the bank was able to cough up enough money to finish their own project. Unluckily for the city.
It goes on. And yes, luckily the city said fuck off, as it should be. And just make this thing smaller for F's sake then. Just make it half of the side, it's fine.
Once it was finished and the sculpture was powered on, the cost to maintain the heavy hydraulic system that moved all the bronze ribbons went on to exceed 6,000 euros. Per day. This money was all coming from taxpayer dollars, and after only 1 month of operation, the hydraulics were turned off and the sculpture has remained still ever since. Contrary to the obelisk's initial goal of being a major landmark for Spain, meant to even match the significance of the likes of Paris's Eiffel Tower, the Caja Madrid obelisk now just kind of stands as a landmark for horrible city planning. Number 4, the orbit. This one's a little less easy to draw. We're taking a short flight from Madrid to London, where it's pretty hard to miss this massive twisted steel sculpture. Costing a whopping 24 million British pounds, this project was built and luckily largely privately funded by the ArcelorMittal steel manufacturer.
Yeah,
The orbit was
luckily.
originally constructed for the
It's a good
2012 Summer Olympic Games and was to serve as a permanent monument to the event. The sculpture measures 115 meters tall and is comprised largely of red tubular steel that twists and winds all around a central trunk. Unlike most art, this sculpture is not just for show, as in the central trunk is an elevator that takes visitors up to a large observation deck. You can also get your steps in by taking the massive spiral staircase that winds around the central trunk. The orbit was designed by artist Anish Kapoor, who's most famous for his Cloudgate sculpture in Chicago. Kapoor is known for making very abstract art, and because the orbit was no exception, when it was finally unveiled to the world, most people were a bit confused as to what it was supposed to be.
Is it meant to be like a torch or something? I don't even know what it meant to be. It looks weird.
Some people saw a giant mutilated roller coaster, while others thought it looked like an abstract Olympic torch.
Yeah.
But most people just had no idea what they were looking at. Some locals even thought the structure was still under construction when it was revealed, because they thought it just looked like a bunch of scaffolding.
Yeah.
Since the Olympics are a fairly large and globally televised event, spitballs came flying from critics across the globe, with people pretty disappointed
should.
at what they were left to look at. But it was London locals who were most concerned since, as mentioned, this was meant to be a permanent installation to the city. Moreover,
That's why if you do public art, a really big chunk of people have to actually enjoy it. If not, you're the laughing stock.
if you wanted to go inside the sculpture up to the observation deck, it cost a whopping £15 to do so. And that's in 2012. Even Anish Kapoor himself was pretty upset to learn how much was being charged.
So for the 3 weeks of the Olympics, the price I think is ridiculously high.
After the Olympics, the orbit stood normal for 4 years until in 2016, the city decided they wanted to add some fun to the sculpture and commissioned another artist to design a massive 178-meter slide to the tower. Okay, now we're talking.
Oh.
This helped the orbit kind of ascend from the level of an abstract sculpture to a genuine tourist attraction. The slide was met with positive feedback, and today, the prices to visit are even lower than they once were when the tower first opened, now at just £7 to go up into the observation deck, and £14 to also go down the slide. And a £5 booking fee for every order. Number 3, the vessel. And that's enough of Europe because we're heading back to New York City, where on the Hudson Yards Public Square in Manhattan, this massive sculpture was constructed and opened in 2019. The vessel was designed by designer Thomas Heatherwick, and like Anish Kapoor's Orbit, the vessel is an interactive sculpture. It is made out of carbon steel, which probably makes it one of the heaviest sculptures on the list. It's also pretty tall, measuring at 150 feet in height, and is comprised of 154 flights of stairs with 80 landings that kind of act as small observation decks. Fortunately, the vessel was privately funded by a large real estate developer because the final construction cost was estimated to be between $150 to $200 million, which makes it the most costly piece of art on our list. So then what makes the vessel so problematic? And why is privately funded in quotation marks? Well, when it was first constructed, Hudson Yards, where the sculpture sits, claimed all ownership of any photos taken of the sculpture. This did not go over very well with the public, mainly because this claim is ridiculous and almost impossible to enforce, but also because at the time the vessel was constructed, nearly $4.5 billion in taxpayer money had been sunken into the Hudson Yards area. And who is one of the main real estate developers in Hudson Yards? The same developer that paid for the construction of the vessel. Ooh, yeah, so this was not a very good look for the developer or the Hudson Yards as a location, and they promptly retracted their strict photo policy. Aside from this hubbub, the actual appearance of the piece was also a little controversial. Some criticized the piece for being a useless staircase to nowhere, and many think it just looks like a giant shawarma. The vessel has also been slated as not being very wheelchair.
The giant tuna kebab. And yes, if you get any kind of public funding, yeah, fuck you. Honestly, what the fuck?
In fact, most staircases aren't, according to my research, although it does feature a single glass elevator that can take guests up to the top observation deck. It's a pretty slow and low capacity ride for an area as busy as New York City. And if you want to go to the top level of the structure today, you can't because it is closed off to the public. Why? Well, That's why. Within just 18 months of opening, 3 people had taken their own lives by leaping over the glass barriers surrounding the staircase of the vessel. This forced the closure of the structure until a solution to the problem was found and put in place in the form of a net that surrounds all accessible areas. The top level remained closed, as netting could not be put around the whole area. This netting proved not to be a very effective solution, as when the vessel was reopened, a 14-year-old boy managed to bypass the safety nets and another life was lost. After this, the vessel remained closed for over 3 years until it was finally reopened in October of 2024 with much taller steel mesh nets now in place to make further incidents hopefully impossible. I don't know why my videos always take a dark turn around the number 3 mark, but we're done with number 3, so let's move on. Number 2, the portal.
Okay, yeah.
Now this one's a sort of two-parter, with point A conveniently in New York City, and point B across the globe in Dublin, Ireland. Created by artist Benedictus Guillis, the portal is basically a giant public webcam that displays live feeds between 2 city streets and allows people to interact with each other from across the world. One side of the portal was placed on a busy pedestrian street in Manhattan, and the other in a comparative spot in central Dublin. The New York to Dublin portal was actually a successor to an already existing portal that the artist had already built, connecting the cities of Vilnius.
And by the way, I find those portals to be actually quite entertaining and a really, really nice idea.
Lithuania, and Lublin, Poland. So if the first portal worked so well, then what could go wrong with a portal between New York City and Dublin? Now, passerbys in both countries actually loved their new art installation and begun sharing their love for each other through the portal. But of course, before very much time, there were a few whippersnappers that stepped in and just had to ruin the fun for everyone. Both sides of the portal had people exposing themselves to the poor and suspecting souls across the world. You had everything from an OnlyFans model exposing herself to Dubliners flashing photos of 9/11 to New York. You know, just the expected stuff. And as a result of all this, the portal did not even make it 1 week until it had to be shut down. It was turned off for just 6 days, and in that time, a fence barrier was installed around the portals, and new technology was implemented that would cause the camera feed to blur if someone got too close. This prevented more people from showing offensive photos from their phones. The portal still actually exists today, but not as such. The Dublin installation still exists, but the New York side was moved to Philadelphia just 3 months after it was turned back on. The portals still operate and have even had another installation pop up in Piauí, Brazil. This makes 5 portals in total that still stand strong, despite their occasional and unfortunate abuse.
So, New York, huh? New York.
Number 1, the tree.
There it is!
Our artistic journey comes to an end in Paris, France, in October of 2014. For a brief time, if you were lucky, you could have been walking around the streets of Paris and could have seen this. It is a giant 24-meter tall inflatable structure that is supposed to look like a giant Christmas tree.
Yeah, of course.
And boy, does it look like a Christmas tree and absolutely nothing else. Just giving that tree at Rockefeller Center a run for its money. But apparently, most of the public did see something else other than a Christmas tree. I can't imagine what. And criticism came flying right away. In fact, the backlash for this piece was so swift that as it was being installed and publicly inflated for the first time, the tree's artist, Paul McCarthy, was brutally attacked and beaten by a passerby. Paul McCarthy was already known for creating controversial pieces in the Christmas spirit, most notably this one. Just keep using your imagination as to...
I did. This is beautiful. This is it's a lens. It's a lens acolyte.
Why this one is controversial as well. Once the installation was complete, photos of the phallic inflatable spread like wildfire, and many were pretty furious that this now stood as a massive, unavoidable landmark in the city. It only took about a week until a group of vandals was bold enough to take action and destroyed the entire massive sculpture by hand, which just consisted of cutting power to the blowers that kept the thing inflated. The tree could have been easily re-inflated so as to actually make it to Christmas, but Paul McCarthy himself actually decided against it, and it was permanently removed from the streets of Paris.
Fair enough.
So in the end, most of the city and the world hated the sculpture. Not everyone. Some people wanted it to stay, but most people hated it, and it was quickly removed with consent from
the
artist.
Okay.
So did anything good come of the tree? Well, a couple local specialty shops did see a massive increase in sales of one particular item. What were they called? Oh yeah, so there's my list here. If I sound a little different, it's because I've contracted the flu whilst editing this video. But that's besides the point. There are hundreds and possibly thousands of other controversial art pieces out there in the world, and if you want to learn about more, I suggest you watch this video from Building Tales here on YouTube. You should watch it not only because he covers the Santa Claus sculpture here in more detail, but also because he covers a bunch of other stuff we did not look at. So you should watch it because he uploaded this video when I was in the middle of making mine, and now I feel like a content thief, so go watch.
It's fine. It's fine. You did a good job here. But for heaven's sake. Beautiful. Please, acolytes. Show Conky Cut Downs some love and me, because this is beautifully done. Beautifully done. But as it is, good night.